Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Eight people have been killed and 31 others injured in multiple rocket attacks on Afghanistan's capital city of Kabul. The Interior Ministry says terrorists fired 14 rockets in the residential areas after 2 IED blasts in the city. No group has claimed the responsibility, while the Taliban have condemned the strikes in populated areas. Iran says EU 3 states should return to fulfilling their obligations under the 2015 deal and stop blaming Tehran. In a statement, Foreign Ministry's spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh criticized the UK, France and Germany for issuing irresponsible statements. Meanwhile, the next potential US Secretary of State, Senator Chris Coons, said he will support returning to the deal if Iran limits its missile program and discontinues support for regional proxies. Ethiopia says its forces fighting Tigray People's Liberation Front have seized the key towns of Adigrat, Aksum and Adawa. In a statement, the country's emergency task force says many fighters of the Tigray junta have also surrendered. The Ethiopian government also ruled out talks after 3 African former presidents were named to help mediate the crisis. US President Donald Trump's eldest son, Trump Jr., has tested positive for COVID-19. Meanwhile, Brazil's infections have crossed 6 million with over 168,000 deaths. Pakistan has registered over 2,800 new cases and 42 deaths overnight, taking the toll to over 7,600. Globally, COVID-19 has claimed 1.37 million lives and infected over 57.4 million. And in tennis, Medvedev cruises into the last 4 of ATP Finals. The 24-year-old Russian beats Diego Schwartzman 6-3 and 6-3 in straight sets at the O2 Arena in London. The world number 4 is set to meet Spaniard Rafael Nadal in the semi-finals today. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. 8 people have been killed and 31 others wounded in rocket attacks in Afghanistan's capital city of Kabul. The Interior Ministry says terrorists fired 14 rockets just an hour after 2 IED explosions in the city. The ministry spokesman Tariq Aryan says the rockets landed in the residential areas. Aryan blamed the Taliban for the attacks. However, the Taliban have denied involvement in the attack, saying they condemn strikes on populated areas. No group has claimed the responsibility as yet. Meanwhile, the US has warned its citizens against traveling to Afghanistan after the attacks. Pakistan has condemned the attack, saying it is important to be vigilant against the spoilers of the peace process. US Secretary of State Pompeo is set to meet with negotiators from the Taliban and the Afghan government in Qatar. State Department says Pompeo will separately meet both the teams in Doha. Pentagon has announced to pull around 2,000 troops from Afghanistan. Earlier, Afghanistan's top peace official Abdullah met Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Istanbul. Abdullah's visit focused on garnering Ankara's support for talks with the Taliban, along with discussing bilateral ties. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the report into the country's alleged war crimes in Afghanistan is disturbing. The Australian Defence Forces report says its troops allegedly killed 39 unarmed prisoners and civilians in Afghanistan. The report recommended referring 19 current and former soldiers for potential criminal prosecution. Morrison said the contents of the report will be dealt with under the Australian justice system by Australians. The Prime Minister added he has conveyed the Afghan president that the report will be taken extremely seriously. Morrison expressed his resolve to put an end to such incidents.
First reflections on this, though, I must say, of course, like all other Australians, the contents of that report are disturbing and distressing.
Iran says EU 3 states should return to fulfilling their obligations under the 2015 deal and stop blaming Tehran. Foreign Ministry's spokesperson has criticized the UK, France and Germany for issuing what he called irresponsible statements. Saeed Khatibzadeh said Tehran halted its nuclear activities after the deal. In a statement, he said Iran only scaled back commitments after the US reinstated sanctions. He added Tehran is ready to start fulfilling its JCPOA commitments if other parties to the deal also abide by their pledges. Meanwhile, the next potential US Secretary of State, Senator Chris Coons, said he will support returning to the deal if Iran limits its missile program and discontinues support for regional proxies. The Saudi-led coalition says it has destroyed an explosive-laden drone launched by the Yemen's Houthi militia towards the kingdom. Coalition's spokesperson, Colonel Turki al-Maliki, said Houthis continue to launch ballistic missiles and armed drones. Saudi state media quoted the spokesperson as saying the attacks are in strict violation of international law. Meanwhile, the coalition also detected 8 reconnaissance aircraft launched by the Houthis over 4 separate areas in Hodeidah. Earlier, the joint forces reported 94 Houthi violations of the UN armistice on Hodeidah within 12 hours. Russia has vetoed a UN Security Council committee's proposal of blacklisting a Libyan militia group for human rights abuses. Russian diplomats say their support is conditioned with the evidence of killing of civilian populations. The proposal was tabled by the US and Germany, which asked to impose an asset freeze and travel ban on the Al-Qaniyat militia. The ban also included the group leader Mohammed Al-Qani. The proposal claimed that the UN mission in Libya has reported hundreds of human rights abuses perpetrated by the Al-Qaniyat militia. Earlier, Libyan authorities found 12 dead bodies from 4 unmarked graves in the Libyan town of Tarhuna. Ethiopia says its forces fighting Tigray People's Liberation Front have seized the key towns of Adigrat, Aksum and Adawa. In a statement, the country's emergency task force says many fighters of the Tigray junta have also surrendered. The Ethiopian government also ruled out talks after 3 African former presidents were named to help mediate the crisis. Meanwhile, UN agencies say they are planning for the possible arrival of the 200,000 refugees in Sudan. A UN official said they have been mobilizing supplies to move people away from crowded transit points on the border to camps. Meanwhile, aid agencies are calling for an immediate temporary ceasefire in the region to allow relief items to reach civilians. However, Ethiopia has so far rejected calls for talks over the crisis, seeing its operation as internal law enforcement. US President Donald Trump's options to overturn election defeat narrow as Michigan lawmakers pledge to follow normal process. After the White House meeting, Michigan's Republican leaders said they will not challenge Biden's win in the state. In a joint statement, Mike Shirkey and Lee Chatfield said Michigan's certification process should be free from threats and intimidation. Trump's campaign has been seeking to challenge Biden's win in Michigan along with several other states. Earlier, Georgia's certification of Biden's win came as a blow to the US president. Meanwhile, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris have met with Democratic congressional leaders. Meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer comes as the Democrats are pushing for another multi-trillion-dollar coronavirus relief package. Joe Biden is set to take office on 20th of January as the 46th US president. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation has pledged to work towards free, open and non-discriminatory trade and investment. Virtually hosted by Malaysia, leaders of the 21-nation forum say they encourage inclusive recovery from COVID-19. What in this report?
In their first joint statement since 2017, the APEC members say they will foster an enabling environment for the development of the digital economy. They also acknowledge the importance of cooperation in facilitating the flow of data and strengthening trust in digital transactions. The leaders agreed to promote economic policies that support global efforts to tackle climate change and strengthen emergency preparedness. The host of the summit, Malaysian Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin, said the pandemic has eclipsed the impact of the trade war.
Refrain from backtracking and resorting to protectionist measures to keep markets open and, of course, borders open as well. And this includes ensuring a smooth cross-border movement of essential goods, including food, medicine, medical supplies, and other necessities during the pandemic to ensure unobstructed supply chain within the region.
Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized on improving the digital business environment, energizing market players, and tapping the potential of the digital economy. The president also called for support for multilateralism and signing for Trans-Pacific Pact.
The Asia-Pacific region must stay as determined as ever to support the multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization at its core. China welcomes the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and will favorably consider joining the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump reaffirmed the commitment of the U.S. to promoting peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. The White House statement said Trump endorsed the APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040.
The Group of 20 is set to debate on global recession due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In a draft communique, the G20 leaders say bringing the pandemic under control is the key to supporting a global economic recovery.
The leaders add the recovery remains uneven, highly uncertain, and subject to elevated downside risks. They note some countries may need debt relief beyond a temporary suspension on payments that will end in June 2021. Officials say high on the agenda are purchases and global distribution of vaccines, drugs, and tests for low-income countries. The European Union will urge the G20 to invest $4.5 billion to help poor countries. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will urge the leaders to take more ambitious action to defeat the pandemic. In remarks ahead of the summit, Johnson said he will also appeal to leaders to address climate change. Saudi Arabia is hosting the two-day virtual summit of leaders.
Turkey says it has agreed with Saudi Arabia to improve bilateral ties. This comes as Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz makes a telephone call to Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan. The Turkish presidency said both the sides agreed to solve outstanding issues through dialogue. In a statement, it added the two leaders also discussed the G20 summit. Saudi state media said the king talked about the summit being hosted by Riyadh. Relations between Ankara and Riyadh have been strained since 2018 after the murder of a Saudi columnist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul. US President Donald Trump's eldest son, Trump Jr., has tested positive for the COVID-19. Meanwhile, Brazil's infections have crossed 6 million with over 168,000 deaths. Globally, COVID-19 has claimed 1.37 million lives and infected over 57.4 million. More in this report.
Coronavirus continues to thrash the Northern Hemisphere, particularly the Americas. The virus statistics in Latin American region continue to present disappointing realities. Mexico has set up rapid COVID-19 test booths at its metro stations and it registered 100,000 deaths within days of hitting 1 million infections. In North America, Canadian Prime Minister has warned of a massive spike in COVID-19 cases which could overwhelm the hospital system. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has accused pharmaceutical giants of delaying their announcements about coronavirus vaccine to punish his support for reducing medicine costs and hurt his re-election efforts.
Pfizer and others even decided to not assess the results of their vaccine. In other words, not come out with a vaccine until just after the election. That's because of what I did with favored nations and these other elements. instead of their original plan to assess the data in October. So they were going to come out in October, but they decided to delay it.
In Europe, Portugal has announced a 15-day extension of a state of emergency after the parliament's approval. German army is currently assisting 23 hospitals across the country in an effort to relieve medical staff in the fight against the coronavirus. Swiss doctors have urged vulnerable COVID-19 patients to record their death wishes in advance to help ease pressures on the ICUs.
What will remain critical in the next weeks are the intensive care and unfortunately a number of deaths because some COVID-19 patients' condition gets worse despite all the care we can provide to them. So we will still have a very difficult situation regarding the health system in the coming weeks.
Over in Asia, India's death toll is rising again with 564 new deaths as country's tally reaches over 132,000, while South Korea's medical groups have called for stricter social distancing curbs as coronavirus continues to batter the country.
In Pakistan, 42 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to 7,603. The Health Ministry says 2,843 people have tested positive overnight. It said there are more than 34,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. The ministry said out of over 371,000 countrywide cases, more than 328,000 have recovered so far. It said over 161,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 113,000 cases. In the capital Islamabad, over 26,000 have been infected so far. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Pakistan is on its way to achieving an import replacement of $1.4 billion. The government is encouraging domestic manufacturing of medical equipment as well as electromagnetic instruments. More in this report by our correspondent Manahil Ahmed from Islamabad.
As the world grapples with the coronavirus, Pakistan is manufacturing medical equipment. Minister for Science and Technology Fawad Chaudhry says Pakistan is planning a new medical equipment city in Faisalabad.
One city in Pakistan, Sialkot, was actually exporting $400 million surgical equipment. But actual worth of that surgical equipment was actually $5 billion. So now we are trying to help that surgical industry to achieve their maximum potential. Likewise, we have created a whole medical equipment city in Faisalabad. We are planning another in Sialkot.
Pakistan, once an importer of basic COVID-19 essentials, is now exporting medical equipment to the European and Gulf countries.
Now we are one of the major exporters of all COVID-related material. When we are exporting to Europe, we are exporting sanitizers to Belgium. We are exporting, these masks, all medical-related, this COVID-related material to West, to the Gulf countries, and we are now the major exporters.
Chairman of the National Disaster Management Authority, Lieutenant General Afzal, says the government is encouraging local businesses to invest in the industry.
We encourage the local industry. We have a big industry which is stitching industry, the cotton industry and the cloth industry, and also the businessmen. And we started purchasing it from them, and alhamdulillah, today we are not only self-sufficient in the PPEs, even N95 masks are being produced by 4 or 5 companies in Pakistan.
The production of medical equipment at home is a revolutionary step. Local manufacturing of the items will reduce the current cost by roughly 50%. Manahil Ahmed, Indus News, Islamabad.
China's Mandeep, a submersible striver, has concluded its diving trials after undergoing acceptance check by an expert team. More about the submarine in this report.
A key project of China's 13th five-year plan, Striver has successfully completed 8 diving operations at the Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific Ocean. Striver is the world's deepest diving manned submersible, hitting a record depth of 10,909 meters.
I appreciate everyone's support for and meticulous operation of the sea trials of Striver. I now announce that the sea trials of the deep-sea submersible Striver have been brought to a successful close.
During its diving trials, China's self-developed submersible obtained large amount of research material. The material will be used for deep-sea scientific exploration, such as sediment, rocks, and sea biological samples. Experts say the successful diving trials pave way for China's future deep-sea research.
Various core parts of Striver, such as the titanium alloy manned spherical shell, buoyancy material, thruster, oil-filled lithium battery, and acoustic communication control system were all produced domestically.
Striver was launched in 2016 by scientists who previously developed manned submersibles Zhalong and Shanghai Yongxie.
In the U.S., at least 8 people have been wounded in a shooting at the Mayfield Mall in Wisconsin. Wauwatosa County Mayor Dennis McBride says the perpetrator still remains at large. In a statement, McBride said 75 police officers are on the scene. The mayor added none of the injuries appeared life-threatening. Police Chief Barry Weber says 7 adults and 1 teenager were transported to the hospital. The police described the shooter as a white male in his 20s or 30s. More than 1,000 protesters have ravaged a supermarket in Brazil's city of Sao Paulo. The incident followed the death of a black man at the hands of the security guards at a store in the city of Porto Alegre. The demonstrators stormed the store, spilling products into the aisles before dispersing. Protests were also carried out at the store's branches in Porto Alegre and Rio de Janeiro. In a statement, the company said it deeply regretted the brutal death. It said the store immediately took steps to ensure those responsible were held accountable for the crime. Government data shows black Brazilians are almost 3 times as likely to be victims of homicide. China Mobile has announced the completion of the world's largest 5G standalone network at the 2020 Global Partners Conference. The exhibition was held in the Guangzhou city of South China's Guangdong province. The first 5G standalone networking attracted the visitors to experience the displays in 3 dimensions. 5G smart home appliances, 5G esports vehicles, and mixed reality were displayed at the exhibition. China has more than 690,000 5G base stations and over 160 million terminal connections. Among China's 3 major operators, China Mobile alone has built the world's largest 5G SA network. 5G technical experts of China Mobile Group, Chen Kim-chin, said they expect that by 2021, more than 40,000 5G base stations will be added to reinforce the current network. Young Palestinian girls are coming forward and competing in boxing tournaments in the country. They are breaking taboos as the sport is mostly popular with men. What about the contest in this report?
Trading jabs and punches, young Palestinian girls competed in a female boxing tournament in the Gaza Strip. The contest featured female boxers as young as 7 years old and was attended by dozens of spectators. Participating girls say there is tension during the tournament because of the audience and the noise, but they are excited.
This is the first boxing tournament I participate in. This is my first experience. I feel stressed, especially with many people around, and I'm excited at the same time.
The number of female boxers in Gaza has doubled in the past 6 months since an initial 18-member all-girl team was formed. It now has 45 athletes. Deputy Chairman of the Palestinian Boxing Federation, Ali Abdul Shafi, says some of the girls will be selected to join the Palestinians boxing team. He says the selected girls will take part in a competition in Kuwait in February.
From this tournament, we will choose players for the national team to participate soon in a championship in Kuwait, which is expected to take place in upcoming February in God's will.
One boxer, Hala Ayub, says she hopes the contest will show people that boxing is not only a man's sport.
JP Morgan has warned that the U.S. economy will shrink in the first quarter of 2021. The firm says the world's largest economy will contract by 1% in the first 3 months of the next year. In a client note, the investment bank said the contraction will follow a 2.8% growth in the final quarter of 2020. The economy has been losing momentum in wake of coronavirus pandemic, which has hit the U.S. the hardest. But the firm's economists are optimistic, saying medical breakthroughs can get the economy back on track later next year. With this report, JP Morgan has become the first company on Wall Street to forecast U.S. economy's contraction. In tennis, Daniil Medvedev cruises into the last four of ATP Finals. The 24-year-old Russian beats Diego Schwartzman 6-3 and 6-3 in straight sets at the O2 Arena in London. Medvedev's continuous attacks throughout the match left Schwartzman struggling for answers. Having lost all 3 matches in last year's tournament, the Russian has remained unbeaten this year so far. The world number 4 is set to meet Spaniard Rafael Nadal in the semi-finals today.
First it was Roger winning everything, then Rafa came there and started to make his marks, and then it was Novak. So it's a great pleasure to play against all of them, and really looking forward for tomorrow.
Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.